The room erupted into polite applause, though I could feel the tension humming beneath the surface like a live wire. My ears rang, not from the clapping, but from the words that had just left my father's lips. He had erased me, again. 8 years of silence. Then a single invitation I thought was an olive branch, only to discover it was a stage set for my humiliation. I felt Jessica's hand squeeze my arm, grounding me. Cass, she whispered urgently, don't let them see you break. But the truth was, I already had. I forced myself to stand straighter, though my throat burned and my hands trembled. Around me, people whispered. I caught words like disinherited, childless, forgotten. My father's closest associates exchanged uneasy glances, as though they had witnessed something indecent. Amanda beamed, soaking up the spotlight as if she had personally orchestrated the entire show. Eric, however, looked less triumphant. His jaw was tight, his eyes darting between me and the floor, like a man trapped in a performance he hadn't agreed to. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, to ask my father if decades of hard work, independence, and quiet dignity meant nothing to him, but I didn't, because I already knew the answer. He hadn't invited me back to reconcile. He had invited me back as a prop, proof to the world that he was a magnanimous father, generous enough to include the estranged daughter for a night, before publicly handing everything to the golden child. I excused myself from the crowd, desperate for air. Outside, the crisp night wind cut against my skin, and for a moment I let it wash over me, cooling the anger simmering beneath my ribs. Jessica followed a few moments later, carrying 2 glasses of champagne. She handed me one. You handled that with more grace than I would have. Grace, I repeated bitterly, that's one word for it. Weakness is another. No, she said firmly, you could have exploded in there. You could have embarrassed him in front of his precious business partners, but you didn't. That takes strength. I took a shaky sip of champagne. He gave away my grandmother's house, the one place that held everything good about my childhood. Gone, just like that. Jessica hesitated, then lowered her voice. Cass, if you think this is just about legacy or pride, it's not. Amanda and Eric need that inheritance to survive. They've burned through their savings. Your dad's business is barely holding together. If he doesn't liquidate something soon, bankruptcy is coming. The pieces clicked into place. This wasn't about love or loyalty. It was about money. Inside, I could hear the music start again, a lively jazz number meant to erase the sting of the announcement. Laughter and chatter floated through the open doors, as though my father's decision hadn't just detonated a bomb at the center of my life. Jessica touched my arm. What are you going to do? I stared back into the glittering ballroom where my family laughed without me, where Amanda twirled in her designer dress while guests congratulated her for a future she hadn't earned. One phone call, I whispered, echoing the words I'd told myself earlier. That's all it will take. Jessica's brow furrowed. To who? I didn't answer, because deep down, I already knew. The same drive that had pushed me to excel despite my family's cruelty was the same drive that would save me now. My father thought he had stripped me of my place in the family, but what he didn't understand was that I had built power outside of his world, in boardrooms, in investments, in connections he had no idea existed. And if he thought he could erase me from his will and walk away unscathed, he was about to learn that Cassandra Wilson was not so easily forgotten. The slap rang like a bell that marked the end of something I had once believed in. For a suspended second, the murmur of the room died and all I could hear was blood in my ears and the soft rustle of guests shifting in their seats. Amanda laughed, a brittle, delighted sound, and the sound of her applause felt like nails on a coffin lid. My mother's laughter layered over it, colder than the chandelier light, and for a moment I could not tell whether I was more stunned by the violence or by the ease with which they'd turned my pain into entertainment. My hand flew to my cheek as if to catch the sting that refused to stay in one place. The heat of it spread to my eyes. I blinked back tears. My throat worked around a sob I was determined not to let out in front of them. The world had narrowed to a tight tunnel, my father's angry face, Amanda preening for the crowd, the glint of crystal and silverware around them. Around the edges, people had begun to react, some shocked, some whispering, and a few looking away as though the sight had embarrassed them, but most faces were unreadable, cataloging the scene like spectators at a play. Don't be dramatic, Cassandra, Amanda called, loud enough that a few nearby guests turned to see who she meant. This is harmless fun, right, Dad? Her smile said it all, complicity, triumph, cruelty made fashionable. My father's chest was heaving. He'd expected me to crumble, to slink away and never challenge him again. Instead, I felt an icy current run through me. Something far colder than the slap settled into my bones, not the need for revenge, but the steady, furious clarity of someone who has been misread and underestimated for decades. I had been catalogued by them as an absence, a problem to be trimmed, an asset to be reallocated. The slap had been intended to finish that narrative. Instead, it lit a fuse. I stepped forward, not to strike back. God knows I would never replicate his violence, but to close the distance between my father's fury and his conscience. "This is not about grandchildren," I said, my voice low but carrying. "This is about law, and legacy, and respect for a woman who worked to keep this family whole long before any of you decided what her house was worth." I could feel the eyes of the room tilt toward me, some in hunger, some in shame, some in curiosity. A microphone of social expectation hovered over us, and people leaned in. My father's face flushed a deeper shade. "You don't get to lecture me," he snapped. "You walked away. You chose Buston. You chose your life." "I built my life," I answered. "I did not steal it. I did not think that meant I lost my right to call this home or to be treated like a daughter. You don't get to erase me on a whim." My hands trembled, but my words sharpened with each sentence. "If the house or money are the issue, tell me. If the business is failing, tell me the truth. Don't humiliate me publicly and then dress it up as prudence." A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Someone clucked sympathy. Another whispered something about family drama and the wrongness of airing such things at a celebration. Harold Reynolds, a man whose presence had always carried a weight of long acquaintance with my father, cleared his throat audibly. He had been one of the few who'd looked at me that night with real concern, not performative pity. His eyes met mine with something like purpose. "You shouldn't have hit your daughter, Robert," he said, measured and calm. "Whatever the dispute, that's unacceptable." The sentence landed like a small stone in a pond. Ripples spread. I saw a few associates avert their eyes, uncomfortable with having been spectators to an assault. My mother made a soft, offended sound, an attempt at scandalized dignity. "We're not here to litigate family failings," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Perhaps not," Harold replied, "but violence can't be the instrument of legacy decisions." He glanced at my father, and for the first time that night, I watched a flicker of confusion cross his face. He had always wanted to be seen as a man of the world, decisive, unafraid. He had never thought his actions might be judged differently by people he respected. Amanda, quick to salvage the show, swanned back toward her husband and whispered frantically into his ear. Eric, for all his earlier anxiety, seemed more uncomfortable now than triumphant. His gaze met mine only briefly, and in it I thought I saw the shadow of something unspoken, maybe guilt, maybe fear, but whatever it was, he did not step forward. The band began an awkward, compensatory tune. Servers moved through the crowd with trays of champagne. Faces practiced into polite smiles. People clapped when the music swelled, the noise trying to push the sting of what had happened under the rug. It didn't work for me. I felt the slap as an echo in my chest, but beneath it there was another sound, the quiet tick of decisions forming in my mind, practical and inexorable. I excused myself, too many eyes following my retreat. In the hallway, the cool air hit my flushed face and I leaned against the wall to steady myself. My gift, the antique pocket watch, felt like a ridiculous talisman in my hand, trinket against a tidal wave. For a moment I allowed grief to wash over me, loss of the childhood I had imagined, loss of the parents who could have been something kinder. Then the phone vibrated in my bag. Thomas. I felt a surge of relief at the sight of his name. He had been my harbor for years, not because he saved me from pain, but because he helped me navigate it. I stepped into a quiet corner and called back. He answered on the second ring. "Cass, how are you?" His voice was steady, threaded with worry. I tasted the salt of unshed tears. "Not well," I said, "but listen, I don't want to make this about a spectacle. I want answers. I want the truth about the house and the business, and I want to protect what's mine." "Don't go home alone," he said before I could finish. "Come back to Boston. I'll make a few calls. We'll find out what's real. We'll get counsel. Don't confront them again without backup." Those were not promises of vengeance. They were practical, legal-minded steps that fit me like a glove. Thomas's calmness steadied me. I took a deep breath and told him where I was. He said he'd be on a red-eye the next morning. "We'll handle this," he assured me. "We'll do it properly." When I hung up, the ballroom's murmur had resumed its surface-level gaiety. Inside, the celebration would continue. Outside, the night air would keep secrets. But something fundamental had shifted. The house that had sheltered my childhood, the legacy my grandmother had intended for family, was now a contested object in a drama I never asked to star in. The slap had been a public repudiation, but it had also, paradoxically, forced the truth into the open. I straightened my shoulders, smoothed my dress, and re-entered the room. For the cameras and the guests, perhaps I was merely the estranged daughter who had been punished. For myself, I had become someone else entirely, not a victim to be displayed, but a woman who would assemble evidence, call witnesses, and take legal steps to protect the past that was rightfully mine. As I moved through the crowd, a few people cast sympathetic looks my way. Some avoided meeting my eyes. Amanda gave me a quick, practiced smile, the same smile that had preceded the clap of cruelty, but it looked smaller now, less confident. My father, still surrounded by his cronies, held his chin high, but I saw fatigue under the performative anger. Perhaps he had not expected me to fight the narrative he was spinning. The night didn't end the way it had been scripted. For them, the party would be recalled as a dramatic family moment. For me, it was the first chapter of a battle I intended to win with facts, counsel, and the inflexible patience of someone who had spent years proving herself in other arenas. I left with the pocket watch in my purse and a plan starting to form, quiet, determined, and inexorable. Outside, the car lights smeared the wet pavement like watercolor. I drove away from the hotel with my jaw set. The city lights of Boston felt like a promise I had earned. The next morning would be for paperwork, for calls, for Harold Reynolds and the county records. The next morning would be for truth. But tonight I allowed myself one private indulgence. I pulled into a quiet overlook, turned off the engine, and let the moonlight wash the sting from my cheek. The world felt both smaller and wider, smaller because the family I had been born into had shown its true colors, and wider because I had, for the first time in years, chosen to act instead of simply endure. The slap had broken something, the illusion of a safe, unquestioned love, but the breaking also cleared the way. From the splintered pieces, I would build a case, a voice, and, eventually, a different kind of family.